Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. I know it's been a couple weeks, but I want to definitely give some time to make sure that I'm presenting this next series of topics with the respect I guess they deserve. I've always had the intention of delving into this kind of detail, and it was one of those things that I think actually got me thinking about even doing an Academy type series. What I'm talking about is the actual review of military training manuals. In this particular case, we're talking about the Infantry, Rifle, Platoon, and Squad training manual from the U.S. Army. And you can actually find these online. I can put a link down below in the description. But it's really a wealth of information. If you think about our games, almost all of the tabletop games are that deal with historical World War II forward into futuristic war games can all leverage the information that are in these manuals, and the concepts actually do translate pretty well to the tabletop. If you actually stick with me for the next few videos, some of these themes might seem very familiar. They've been talked about in more general terms within series about Liddell Hart, Sun Tzu, and some of the other videos I've put out. But when you take it down to the squad level, down to the platoon level, and talk in specific detailed terms, it's really interesting how they translate. So we're going to kind of dive into it over the next probably maybe 4 videos. We'll see how it all plays out. But there's a lot of material in the manual, and of course they're talking about a lot of concepts. This is a real training manual. Some technical things that we really don't need to deal with within this, our talks. Specifics about particular weapon systems, ballistics charts, and ranges, and all the things that you do need to think about in real life that really don't matter on the tabletop. They're specific to a particular weapon system. Now, the manual itself is, it covers some really interesting topics, and some of the key ones, if you come down to just the fundamentals of tactics, threat engagement, or I guess really it's employing fires. How do you actually use the weapon systems you have available to you, and then finally movement. Those are all things we actually care about in our tabletop war games. So with that, let's kind of start now. Not quite at the beginning, because again, like I say, these manuals contain a lot of information specific to the real world organizations and the real world weapon systems. So we're actually going to begin our discussion in, I guess, section 2. I guess you'd call it almost chapter 2. Now I don't want to get these wrong, so I'm going to actually read directly out of the manual. So bear with me as I read, like I've done on previous videos. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the points. So in chapter 2 deals with the principles of attack, specifically the massing the effects of fire. Okay, think about it. It's really the concentration of force. But let's talk about it in more detail at the platoon level. All right. So, quoting from the book, infantry units must mass the effects of fires to achieve decisive results. There are many ways to achieve fire superiority. They include using combinations of weapons and munitions, applying the appropriate volume and accuracy of fire at enemy point and area targets, establishing engagement criteria and engagement priorities, assigning soldiers mutually supporting positions and overlapping sectors of fire, and focusing fires on enemy vulnerabilities. There's a lot in there, and let's kind of break it down real quick just to get some of these definitions out of the way. Again, using combinations of weapons and munitions. If you think about it, in our games, we have a wide variety often of types of weapons that have different effects and on the targeted unit. Correct, right? Applying the appropriate volumes and accuracy. That's a key piece we don't often think about directly, but it's always kind of in the back of our minds. So you want to make sure that the fire you're using, you're setting the right expectations by accounting for the accuracy or the likelihood that the weapon system is actually going to hit and do its intended effect, right? Now, they're talking about establishing engagement criteria and engagement priorities, that's about, when are you going to engage the opponent and what are you going to engage first? We've talked about threat engagement before, threat prioritization before, and one thing we haven't really talked much about is when do you actually engage? But going back through some of Sun Tzu's work, is you got to find the appropriate time and the best time to engage a particular threat. Finally, the last two are kind of linked. The idea of assigning soldiers mutually supporting positions, which we talked about in previous videos, and overlapping sectors of fire, in the fields of fire. Also focusing, however, on enemy vulnerabilities, which has been woven throughout Sun Tzu's works and Liddell Hart's work, any really military strategy works, okay? So very, very standard stuff, but that's what they're going to be talking about here, and we will focus on. So, continuing on, as far as concentration of fires, both preparatory and supporting, is necessary to gain and maintain fire superiority. Fires from weapons that are not organic to the platoon or squad are coordinated by the unit leader or his next headquarters. Going through that, it's talking about artillery, tanks, and tactical air being available. As you read through this section, you start thinking more, you start seeing how, with this paragraph, we're talking about the individual squads in our tables and the platoon they're part of being supported by all these other units on the table, coordinated by some higher level of command, right? This manual is describing, in real world terms, what we actually do on the tabletop. Again, reinforcing the fact that you can apply these to the table. So, continuing on, and this is where the meat really starts on section 8, basically, of the second chapter. Every tactical plan the leader develops, both offense and defense, must have a concept of fires. For example, how will the platoon gain and maintain fire superiority? The plan to achieve fire superiority includes initiation, adjustments, and ceasing fire. Because the effects of fire tend to diminish as the enemy becomes accustomed to it, fire should initially be intense. Delivery of large volumes of concentrated fire into a specific area inflicts maximum damage and shock. Properly timed and delivered fires contribute to the achievement of surprise and the destruction of the enemy. Shifting and ceasing fires should be planned and executed with equal precision. If not, the complementary movement to positions of advantage is delayed. Okay? The enemy could have an opportunity to recover and react. He's speaking very, very well here in the manual, talking about how you want to concentrate your fire on a unit to maximize the effect. There are several different systems that will really cause this to play into the game pretty well. In the case, the three that I play most heavily right now, as far as tabletop go, are the 40K, bolt action, and X-wing. You can all apply this to all of them, even though X-wing is a fighter, almost like a pilot game, right? But still, the idea being, when you have a target unit, you need to apply coordinated fire from multiple units to bring the maximum effect on that unit, to disable it or destroy it. Okay. In bolt action, the more units you fire and hit, the more pins you apply, which means the less likely it is to react appropriately. It'll have fail orders checks. It won't actually engage. It won't be able to shoot at you as likely. The opponent may have to delay and actually try to rally, which means it's for one turn he's not firing at you. It's important. In 40K, the more casualties you inflict on a particular unit, like infantry unit, multi-model unit, the more likely it could be that additional models will quit the field in a morale check and just be taken off. So massing that effects, coordinating the effects of fire to maximize the impact, maximize the shock, maximize the disruption of the opponent is what he's talking about here. You need to consider that when you are applying your fires to decide when to concentrate units or fire from multiple units on a single target. Again, instead of just peanut butter spreading or shotgunning units across the table, hitting everything that's in range. This is all about identifying the right threat in priority order and going after, from the infantry units all the way up to supportive fire, taking out that one biggest threat. Now, he continues on with the concept of talking about the plan for initiating, adjusting, and then ceasing. So again, making a decision. When are you going to start? When are you going to start shooting at it? How are you going to adjust? So if the effect isn't quite what you wanted, or maybe is bigger than you wanted or expected, what are you going to do to adjust to get where you're wanting? And then when you finally cease, when are you going to stop firing on that unit? When is it no longer a significant threat? Even, I've talked about in an earlier video, Tactica video, to kill or not to kill in the new 8th edition 40K, taking a vehicle, in a lot of cases, the larger vehicles and monsters, creatures, and what have you, have 3 tiers of capability. The more wounds you deliver to them, the more impacted they are, the less accurate they are in their shooting, the fewer attacks they have. Things like that break down. Even they might move slower, usually move slower. So volume of fire to bring them down to those different tiers matters, and maybe that's your goal. You don't need to take them out. You just need to get them down to where they're not as impactful on your army, not as big as a threat, right? So that's your plan. You have to build that plan into your coordination of fires. Okay, so there's a lot there, and so we're going to actually break this Mask the Effects of Fire into 2 separate videos. So I want you to kind of go back and think about how you apply, what we've discussed today on your tabletop, in the games you play. How are you going to plan, after you've prioritized your threats, how are you going to plan the concentration of your fires onto a particular threat in whatever order, and when are you going to decide that enough is enough, you've shot it enough, you can move on to the next threat? Remember, it's not always when you kill it. It may be at some point below that. There was an orc unit I shot at once in 40K. I didn't need to take it off the board because I whittled it down far enough that the casualties I inflicted were sufficient that no matter what he rolled on his morale check, the rest of the unit was going to flee the battlefield. So I didn't need to waste any more shots at it. I could divert my fire to something else. So be very aware of what you're shooting at, what you need to do to actually affect it, and what does it really take to neutralize it. You may not have to take it off with your shooting. You may be able to leverage other things to make it a little less of a threat. All right, so comment below on any feedback you've got, comments you have regarding this particular theory, and again, we'll see you in the next week's edition of the Academy, where we'll finish out our discussion on masking the effects of fire. All right, bye-bye.